The night of Samhain arrives like an uninvited guest, unwelcome, inevitable, and carrying with it the weight of countless centuries. Across the Irish countryside, from the windswept cliffs of County Clare to the mist-laden bogs of County Sligo, something ancient stirs beneath the earth and between the worlds. The barrier that separates our reality from the realm of the unseen grows progressively thinner as autumn surrenders its final breath to winter's approaching darkness. You stand at the threshold of a night unlike any other, where the rules that govern the natural world lose their authority, and the creatures of legend begin their prowling. Imagine yourself standing at a crossroads in rural Ireland as twilight descends into true darkness. The air carries a peculiar quality, neither cold nor warm, but somehow existing in both states simultaneously. Farmers across the island have completed their final harvests, leaving behind one last sheaf of grain in the fields, an offering made not from generosity, but from necessity, from an ancient understanding passed down through generations. The horses in their stables grow restless. Dogs refuse to venture beyond their thresholds. The very wind seems to pause, holding its breath as if the earth itself is waiting for something momentous to occur. In this liminal space between Samhain's Eve and the beginning of winter proper, the distance between worlds collapses entirely. This is the night when the Phooka awakens. Before we journey deeper into this tale of terror and transformation, I want you to understand that what you are about to experience is not merely a ghost story or a fairy tale told to frighten children. The Phooka exists within the living tradition of Irish folklore, a creature whose influence has shaped how an entire people understood the dangers lurking beyond the safety of their hearths. If you find yourself drawn into this exploration of ancient fears and supernatural intelligence, I encourage you to subscribe to Echoes of the Old World, where we venture into the depths of historical cultures and uncover the truths hidden within their most enduring legends. This channel is dedicated to bringing these stories back to life, to understanding the profound reasons why our ancestors feared what they feared and respected what they respected. But before we continue, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments where you are watching this from tonight. Are you in Ireland itself, perhaps in one of the counties we will soon be discussing? Or are you somewhere else in the world, separated by ocean and time from the lands where this mythology was born? Your connection to these stories matters, because folklore belongs not merely to the past, but to all of us who choose to listen and remember. The Phooka is not a creature that exists in singular form, bound to one shape or one method of terror. Rather, it is an entity of profound multiplicity, a shapeshifter of such power and unpredictability that Irish travellers learn to fear not just one monster, but the infinite possibilities of what that monster might become. In the darkness of Samhain, when the boundaries between nature and the supernatural become negotiable, the Phooka transforms according to its will and its hunger. Some nights it emerges as a horse, not an ordinary beast, but a specimen of such terrible beauty that travellers cannot help but stare, despite every instinct screaming at them to look away. On other occasions, the Phooka manifests as something far more terrible, a monstrous eagle whose wingspan seems to consume the very sky, or a massive bull whose nostrils exhale flames that illuminate the darkness like miniature infernos. There are those who have reported encountering it in its hairiest form, a shambling spirit covered entirely in dark fur, neither clearly animal nor human, but something far more disturbing because of its ambiguity. Each transformation serves a purpose. Each shape suits different seasons and different circumstances, and each one carries within it the full, malevolent intelligence of the creature beneath. What makes the Phooka truly terrifying is not merely its ability to change forms, but the terrible modus operandi that accompanies each manifestation. When the Phooka approaches in its horse form, the shapeshifter does not simply charge at its prey or engage in straightforward confrontation. Instead, it positions itself with an intelligence that speaks to something far older and more calculating than simple animal instinct. The creature maneuvers so that its head appears between the legs of an unsuspecting traveler, using a position of such intimate proximity that resistance becomes nearly impossible. In that horrifying moment, before the victim can process what is occurring, they find themselves thrust upward and backward onto the Phooka's back. Once a traveler finds themselves mounted upon this supernatural beast, the true horror of the Phooka's nature becomes undeniable. The creature does not gallop along the roads where ordinary horses travel, following the paths that connect villages and farmsteads. Instead, the Phooka launches itself over cliffs and ravines with absolute disregard for the laws of physics that govern normal movement. It soars across bodies of water, Irish lakes and coastal seas, as if the water were solid ground beneath its hooves. Most terrifyingly of all, the Phooka ascends into the night sky itself, climbing higher and higher until the earth below becomes unrecognizable and the moon seems close enough to touch. A journey that combines the sensations of falling and flying in perfect, nauseating simultaneity. The victims of these rides rarely speak in coherent terms about their experience afterward, if they survive at all. Those who return do so profoundly changed, their minds struggling to process the impossibility of what their bodies experienced. Some remain silent for years, unable or unwilling to describe the vistas they witnessed, or the terrible sensation of reality unraveling around them. Others speak in fragments, their accounts broken and disjointed, as if the very act of trying to impose language and rational structure upon the experience causes them genuine physical pain. The Phooka exists not merely as a creature of the present moment, but as an entity woven into the deepest fabric of Irish culture and history. Across every county and region of Ireland, local variations of the Phooka mythology have developed over centuries, each adapted to reflect the specific geography, the unique fears, and the particular wisdom of the communities that preserve these stories. In some places, the Phooka is spoken of with a tone suggesting it might be reasoned with, negotiated with, if one follows the proper protocols and shows appropriate respect. In other regions, it is described as wholly malevolent, an entity incapable of mercy or restraint, a force of nature as indifferent to human suffering as winter is to a farmer's desperate prayers for one more warm day. Yet, all these variations share a common truth. The Phooka is ancient, intelligent, and bound by rules and laws that predate our current civilization. It is neither good nor evil in any moral sense that we would understand, but rather primordial, a remnant of a time when the boundary between worlds was far more permeable than it is today. And as Samhain approaches once more, as the veil grows thin and the distance between seasons collapses into that single sacred and terrible night, the Phooka remains waiting in the shadows, persistent and unchanged, a test and a terror for those foolish enough to travel the Irish roads after darkness falls. In the depths of Samhain's darkness, when the moon hangs low and pale above the Irish countryside, the Phooka emerges in its most iconic and terrifying manifestation, a horse of incomparable beauty and unmistakable supernatural origin. This creature is not merely a beast of flesh and bone, but rather a perfect embodiment of seduction and terror merged into a single hypnotic form. To encounter this version of the Phooka is to face the full weight of its ancient intelligence wrapped in an exterior so magnificent that rational thought crumbles before it. The horse materializes most often at crossroads, at the liminal points where paths intersect, and travelers must make choices about which direction to follow. Its coat is black, not the simple black of an ordinary stallion, but an absolute blackness that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. A darkness so profound that it appears almost to create a void in the surrounding landscape. The texture of this coat shimmers with an opalescent quality that defies natural explanation, as if the creature's skin itself vibrates at a frequency just beyond normal perception. When moonlight touches this supernatural horse, the effect is deeply unsettling. Rather than reflecting light normally, the black coat seems to glow from within, radiating an inner luminescence that speaks to something fundamentally wrong about the beast's very nature. But the true source of the Phooka's terrible power lies in its eyes. These are not the eyes of any ordinary horse, gentle or even aggressive in the way natural animals might be. Instead, the Phooka's eyes burn with an actual visible fire, not a metaphorical heat, but genuine flames that dance and flicker in the sockets like hellfire itself has found its way into the creature's skull. These eyes are enormous, disproportionately large for even such a magnificent horse, giving the creature an appearance of watchfulness that borders on the supernatural intelligence one might expect from a predator far more dangerous than mere animal. The flames within those eyes shift in color, from deep crimson to sickly amber to a pale blue that cuts through the darkness like a beacon of dread. The physical proportions of the black horse are themselves a testament to the Phooka's fundamentally unnatural state. The creature stands taller than any mortal horse, its legs impossibly long and muscular, corded with strength that seems barely contained beneath the skin. The mane flows like liquid obsidian, never settling into stillness, but rather moving with a life of its own, as if disturbed by winds that touch nothing else in the surrounding environment. The tail drags upon the ground behind the creature, occasionally brushing the earth with a sound like whispers or distant screams. The hooves themselves are a dark grey or almost metallic black, striking sparks against stone as the Phooka moves, creating a rhythmic clattering that warns, or perhaps calls, to those who hear it echoing through the night. What makes the black horse form of the Phooka so particularly dangerous is the profound allure it possesses. This is not the allure of simple physical beauty, though the creature certainly possesses that in abundance. Rather, the Phooka radiates a kind of magnetic attraction that operates on a level deeper than conscious reasoning. Travelers who encounter this manifestation report feeling compelled toward the creature despite every instinct demanding they flee or avert their eyes. Some describe the sensation as an irresistible pull, as if invisible threads were being drawn from deep within their chests directly toward the horse. Others speak of a hypnotic quality to the creature's gaze, those burning eyes fixing upon them with such concentrated intelligence and purpose that independent thought becomes nearly impossible. The power of this attraction increases dramatically during Samhain itself. On that one sacred and terrible night, the Phooka's ability to draw travelers toward itself becomes almost overwhelming in its intensity. The creature does not need to chase or pursue. Instead, victims find themselves walking toward it as if in a trance, their feet carrying them forward without conscious command. They approach slowly, deliberately, moving as if underwater, their minds simultaneously screaming warnings they cannot quite process and whispering justifications for their movement. By the time they have fully recognized the danger, they are already close enough for the Phooka to position itself for its terrible embrace. The horse moves with a grace and elegance that belies its size and power. Every motion is deliberate and controlled, suggesting a creature of profound intelligence using its physical form as an instrument of will. Unlike ordinary horses, which must navigate terrain with caution and consideration for their own safety, the Phooka moves across land as if the earth itself rearranges to accommodate its passage. It can traverse bogland without sinking, navigate rocky terrain at speeds that should prove impossible, and leap obstacles that would cause any ordinary beast to hesitate. The supernatural nature of its movement becomes apparent only in retrospect, only after one realizes they have traveled distances that should have required hours in what felt like mere minutes. The Phooka's black horse form carries within it a paradox that speaks to the fundamental duality of Irish mythology. The creature is beautiful, genuinely, aesthetically beautiful in a way that transcends cultural or personal preference, and yet that beauty is inseparable from its function as a tool of terror. Travelers who have managed to escape the Phooka's rides speak of the awful conflict between the horror of their experience and the terrible fact that the creature which perpetrated that horror was the most magnificent being they had ever witnessed. This contradiction creates a lasting wound in the mind of survivors, a psychological damage that simple physical injury cannot inflict. The black horse stands as the Phooka's most effective form precisely because it exploits the contradiction between appearance and reality. It represents a fundamental test of human judgment and courage. Will the observer prioritize the evidence of their eyes or the warnings of their ancestral knowledge? Will they trust the testimony of those who have seen the creature before, or will they believe their own immediate perception of beauty and wonder? The Phooka, in this form, becomes a living embodiment of the question that haunts Irish culture. How does one survive in a world where the most dangerous things often wear the most appealing masks? As the black horse stands in the darkness of Samhain, its fiery eyes burning holes in the night, it waits with the patience of something that has existed for centuries and will exist for centuries more. It does not grow impatient or restless. It simply waits, an absolute predator in a form that mortals cannot help but desire. The ancient roads of Ireland belong to this creature on this one terrible night, and any traveller who finds themselves upon those roads after darkness falls must reckon with the presence of beauty that comes wrapped in dread. The moment of contact arrives with a terrible inevitability that survivors describe as both instantaneous and eternal, as if time itself fractures at the exact second when human flesh meets the supernatural form of the Phooka. You stand upon the Irish road, perhaps having glimpsed the magnificent black horse approaching through the mist, or perhaps you have only just become aware of its presence when the creature makes its move. The Phooka does not attack in the manner of an ordinary predator. Instead, it executes a movement so calculated and deliberate that it speaks to intelligence operating far beyond the level of simple animal instinct. The horse positions itself with precision, lowering its head and angling its massive body so that its skull passes directly between your legs, the placement so exact that resistance becomes geometrically impossible. In that single moment, the ordinary world ceases to exist for you. The creature's back rises beneath you with a power that feels almost like an explosion, lifting you upward with force sufficient to knock the air from your lungs. Your fingers, if you manage to grip anything at all, find only the black coat of the horse, slick and burning hot to the touch despite its apparent solidity. The Phooka's mane flows against your face and hands, and those who have survived this experience report that it feels like touching water that has somehow achieved the consistency of silk, cool and burning simultaneously. In the first seconds of the ride, panic manifests in a form nearly indistinguishable from absolute insanity. Your mind rejects what is occurring with such totality that rational thought becomes impossible. The first terrible discovery comes when you realize that the Phooka is not traveling along the road. The creature launches itself forward with a velocity that makes ordinary galloping seem leisurely, but more disturbingly, the direction of movement is vertical as well as forward. You feel the ground falling away beneath you, and your stomach lurches with the sickening sensation of altitude gained far too rapidly. The Phooka does not slow or hesitate at the cliff edge that suddenly appears in the darkness. Instead, It accelerates, its legs pumping with a rhythm that seems to require no purchase against stone or earth. You plunge out into open air, and for several heartbeats, the only reality is the terrible knowledge that you are suspended above an abyss, held aloft by a creature that violates every law of nature you have ever understood. Yet, the Phooka does not fall. The horse continues its gallop through empty air as if the void beneath was solid ground, its hooves striking nothing, its legs moving in their terrible rhythm, and somehow, impossibly, you remain mounted upon its back. The wind screams around you with a voice that carries an almost articulate quality, as if the air itself is crying out in protest at being forced to support this violation of natural law. Your eyes water from the velocity of the passage. Your hands grip the Phooka's mane so tightly that you fear you will tear handfuls of that terrible hair from the creature's neck. Yet you cannot loosen your hold, because to do so would mean falling into darkness that has no bottom and offers no mercy. The landscape below transforms into something unrecognizable. The gentle hills of the Irish countryside give way to coastline, and then to the black expanse of the sea itself. You realize with dawning horror that the Phooka is not heading toward the water to stop, but rather to cross it, and seconds later, you feel the spray of ocean mist against your face as the supernatural horse gallops across the surface of the waves as if it were more solid than the earth itself. The water moves beneath you. The spray soaks your clothing, but the Phooka's hooves never break the surface. Instead, the creature moves across the sea with the same terrible confidence it displayed when leaping cliffs. You glimpse fishing boats below you at one point, their crews presumably unaware of the nightmare passing overhead, unable to perceive the supernatural violation of natural law occurring mere feet above their heads. The most difficult part of describing this experience is articulating the sensation that accompanies the journey. It is not simple fear, though terror certainly comprises a portion of it. Instead, what survivors speak of most frequently is a kind of dissociation, a profound separation between the self that observes the impossible journey and the self that is experiencing it. You remain conscious throughout the entire ordeal, capable of thought and perception, yet simultaneously possessed by a clarity that exists at the boundary between sanity and complete psychological dissolution. Some survivors report that they were unable to close their eyes during any portion of the ride, that their eyelids remained permanently open, as if the Phooka's supernatural power had forced them to witness every moment of the impossible journey. The duration of the ride defies measurement. Some survivors insist that it lasted only minutes, yet they simultaneously acknowledge that they crossed distances that should have required hours to traverse. Others swear that the ride continued for days, or perhaps weeks, or perhaps forever, and only later discover, to their profound confusion, that according to the reckoning of ordinary time, only a few hours have passed since their ordeal began. This temporal distortion adds another layer of disorientation to the experience, creating in the minds of victims a permanent uncertainty about the nature of time itself. If such flexibility could exist in the universe, if hours could contain weeks, if minutes could expand into eternities, then what else about reality might prove equally unstable? The Phooka's path carries it ever higher. The ocean recedes beneath you, and the earth itself becomes a dim presence far below, a sphere of darkness distinguished only by the faint glimmer of distant fires, where human habitations still cling to existence. The atmosphere grows thin enough that breathing becomes difficult, and your lungs burn with the effort of drawing breath from air that seems increasingly unsubstantial. The atmosphere grows thin enough that breathing becomes difficult, and your lungs burn with the effort of drawing breath from air that seems increasingly unsubstantial. Yet the Phooka does not slow. the creature continues its impossible journey with unwavering determination, ascending higher and higher until the stars surrounding you become clearer and sharper than they have ever appeared from any earthly vantage point. You realize with absolute certainty that you are no longer approaching the sky. You have passed beyond it entirely. The moon hangs before you like a destination, enormous and pale and terribly close. The Phooka's gallop seems aimed directly at this celestial target, and the creature does not deviate or turn aside, but instead continues its relentless forward momentum. In those final moments, before contact with the lunar surface, or before consciousness mercifully fails and the memories become fragmented and unreliable, you experience a revelation that some survivors describe as beautiful, and others describe as the most horrifying instant of their entire lives. You perceive for just a moment the terrible scope of the universe, the insignificance of human concerns, and the absolute indifference of creation toward human suffering or survival. Then, with an abruptness that equals only the initial moment of the Phooka's emergence, the ride ceases. You find yourself lying upon the ground somewhere on Irish soil, though whether it is the same location from which you departed remains eternally uncertain. The Phooka has vanished, departing as inexplicably as it arrived, leaving behind only a traumatized human consciousness struggling to reconcile what occurred with the demands of rational explanation. The scars of this journey, however, will remain with you forever, not merely the psychological wounds, but the absolute knowledge that the universe is far larger and far more terrible than you had ever imagined. Not every Phooka takes the form of a magnificent horse, nor does every manifestation occur upon terrestrial ground where human feet can find purchase and potential escape remains theoretically possible. As Samhain's darkness deepens and the veil between worlds grows increasingly permeable, the shapeshifter emerges in a form perhaps even more terrifying than its equine manifestation. A monstrous bird of prey so vast and so fundamentally wrong in its proportions that those unfortunate enough to witness it struggle for the rest of their lives to describe what they have seen. This is the Phooka as aerial predator, a creature of wings and terrible hunger that transforms the very sky into a domain of supernatural danger. When this form takes shape in the darkness above the Irish countryside, even the wind itself seems to recoil from the presence of something so profoundly unnatural. The wingspan of the Phooka in its eagle form defies any comparison to ordinary avian predators. Those who have glimpsed this manifestation speak of wings so enormous that they appear to eclipse the moon itself when the creature positions itself between the observer and that celestial body. The wings are not feathered in any conventional sense. Instead, they seem to be composed of something simultaneously like shadow and like substance, an almost liquid darkness that flows and ripples as the creature moves through the air. The feathers, where they are visible at all, appear to be constructed from something darker than black itself, feathers that absorb light rather than reflect it, creating a silhouette against the night sky that is somehow more visible through its very absence of illumination. The body of the eagle form maintains a proportion that speaks to the Phooka's fundamental alienness. While an ordinary eagle might possess a body length of perhaps 3 feet, the Phooka's avian form looms with a body the size of a grown man, perhaps larger, suggesting a creature that violates the natural laws governing size relationships between wings and torsos. The massive talons that extend from the creature's feet are each the length of a forearm, curved like scythes and capable of tearing through stone with the same ease that ordinary claws penetrate flesh. These talons glint with a sickly phosphorescence in the darkness, occasionally catching what little light exists in the Samhain night and reflecting it back with an intensity that seems to come from within rather than from any external source. The head of the Phooka's eagle form possesses a terrible intelligence that distinguishes it absolutely from any natural bird. The eyes are enormous, each the size of a human fist, and they burn with the same infernal fire visible in the horse form's gaze. These eyes rotate with an independence that violates avian anatomy. They can move independently of one another, allowing the creature to observe simultaneously in different directions, or to focus both with devastating concentration upon a single target. The beak is a weapon of nightmarish proportions, a curved and serrated instrument that could easily remove a human head in a single movement. When the Phooka opens this beak, the interior reveals nothing but absolute darkness, as if the throat descends into an abyss rather than into any ordinary internal anatomy. The hunting patterns of the Phooka in this form follow no predictable trajectory or schedule. The creature may appear over a specific location night after night during Samhain week, or it may manifest only once, its single appearance serving as a sufficient warning to alter patterns of behavior for generations. Those communities that have experienced the aerial visitation of the Phooka describe the creature's movements as appearing random and chaotic at first glance. Yet there exists an underlying intelligence to the pattern, a hunting strategy refined across centuries. The shapeshifter seems particularly drawn to gatherings of travelers, to places where humans congregate during the liminal nights, and to locations associated with significant historical events or spiritual significance. The warning of an approaching aerial Phooka manifests in signs that animals perceive long before humans understand the danger. Flocks of birds scatter and disappear, abandoning their roosting places and fleeing to regions beyond the creature's immediate hunting ground. Horses become panicked and uncontrollable, their natural fear of predators amplified to an almost supernatural degree by proximity to the Phooka's presence. Dogs, contrary to their usual behavior, refuse to bark at the creature. Instead, they cower in complete silence, as if they understand instinctively that to announce their awareness of the creature's presence is to invite targeted predation. The very wind changes quality, becoming heavier and more oppressive, carrying with it a scent that survivors describe as simultaneously metallic, burnt, and utterly alien. Looking upward at Samhain night becomes an exercise in calculated risk for those who live in Ireland during this dangerous season. The old wisdom passed down through generations warns explicitly against looking up into the darkness above, for to see the Phooka in its aerial form is to attract its attention in ways that mere awareness cannot achieve. There exists something about direct visual contact, something about the meeting of human eyes with those terrible burning gaze of the creature, that seems to establish a connection that the Phooka recognizes and exploits. Many survivors of near encounters with the aerial manifestation speak of the instant when they accidentally looked upward and saw the creature descending toward them. And in that moment of visual contact, they perceived a hunger in those enormous eyes that transcended mere animal appetite. The Phooka's aerial form is particularly dangerous because of the advantages it possesses in its domain. Unlike terrestrial encounters where escape routes exist and where geography provides some limited protection, the creature's presence in the sky eliminates these possibilities. A person exposed in open ground has no shelter that would protect them from a creature capable of diving from the clouds, with talons extended and eyes burning with otherworldly intelligence. The stories speak of entire settlements altering their patterns of life during Samhain, of people remaining indoors after darkness, of essential work being postponed rather than undertaken during daylight hours when the creature remains mostly dormant. The connection between the Phooka's aerial form and the moment of Samhain itself appears more pronounced than even the horse manifestation's temporal anchor. This form seems to emerge with greatest frequency and greatest intensity on the actual night of Samhain, as if the thinning of the veil between worlds reaches its absolute minimum and allows for manifestations of such profound, supernatural violation. Ancient records speak of entire villages witnessing the aerial Phooka on single nights, of mass sightings that created terror and terror that transformed into legend and folklore. Whether these accounts represent literal truth or symbolic memory, they testify to the profound impact that the creature's aerial manifestation has maintained upon the Irish consciousness across centuries. There exists a third manifestation of the Phooka that strikes at the very heart of agricultural life in Ireland, a form that emerges not from wilderness or sky, but from the cultivated fields themselves, as if the earth has given birth to something that should never have been permitted to exist. This is the Phooka in its bull form. And of all the shapeshifter's transformations, this one speaks most directly to the primal fears that governed the lives of farming communities across the Irish countryside. The bull has always occupied a position of profound significance in Celtic culture, representing fertility, power, and the raw forces of nature that humans could harness but never truly control. The Phooka's appropriation of this form creates something that transforms the symbol of agricultural abundance into a harbinger of catastrophe and ruin. The bull that appears during Samhain possesses dimensions that immediately distinguish it from any ordinary bovine, however large or impressive such animals might be. This creature stands nearly twice the height of a mortal bull, its massive frame composed of muscle, so densely packed that it seems impossible the creature's legs could support such a concentration of power and mass. The hide is the color of darkened iron, a grayish black that seems to ripple and shift as the creature moves, suggesting something beneath the surface struggling against its bovine containment. The horns extend outward and slightly upward, each one the thickness of a man's arm, and curved with a deadly grace that promises dismemberment to anything caught upon their trajectory. The creature's shoulders are impossibly broad, suggesting that it could thrust through stone walls with minimal difficulty. Yet, what distinguishes this form of the Phooka most profoundly from any natural bull are the flames that emerge from its sensory organs. From the creature's nostrils, actual fire erupts in steady plumes, a continuous exhalation of supernatural flames that illuminate the darkness around the bull with a sickly orange-red glow. These are not merely symbolic fires or atmospheric effects, but genuine flames capable of igniting anything flammable they encounter, capable of scorching flesh and leaving burns that refuse to heal properly. The heat radiating from these nostrils is perceptible from considerable distance, creating a zone of supernatural warmth that extends outward from the creature in a sphere of thermal energy. Survivors who have witnessed this manifestation speak of being able to feel the heat from the bull's breath at distances of 20 feet or more, of their skin beginning to blister from exposure to the supernatural temperature. The eyes of the bull form burn with the same infernal fire visible in all the Phooka's manifestations, but in this particular form, the flames seem somehow more intense and more focused. These burning eyes possess a quality of savage intelligence and contempt that suggests the creature views all mortals with profound disdain. The gaze of the Phooka in bull form is capable of producing a hypnotic effect upon observers, a compulsion to maintain visual contact that can result in temporary paralysis, as the viewer finds themselves frozen by the intensity of that burning stare. Those who have managed to escape prolonged eye contact with the bull forms speak of hearing voices emanating from those flames, voices that whisper threats and revelations, that promise knowledge of futures most humans would prefer to remain ignorant of. The manner of the Phooka's movement in bull form differs dramatically from its behavior in horse or eagle manifestations. Rather than attempting seduction or aerial predation, the bull charges with an absoluteness of purpose that suggests nothing could convince it to alter its course. The creature moves with surprising speed for something of such enormous mass, accelerating across terrain with a thunderous force that shakes the earth beneath it and creates a vibration perceptible for considerable distances. The hooves strike stone and soil with impacts that create small craters, evidence of the supernatural strength concentrated within this form. When the Phooka charges in this manifestation, witnesses describe a sound like a great furnace being stoked, a roaring exhalation of flame and fury that seems designed to announce the creature's presence and to instill maximum terror in those it approaches. The agricultural communities of Ireland developed an understandable terror of this particular manifestation, for the bull form of the Phooka represents a direct threat to the source of their survival. The creature emerges in fields during the final weeks of autumn, sometimes in places where animals are being fattened for the winter, or gathered for the final market sales before season's end. The Phooka's presence in these contexts can devastate entire herds, scattering animals in terror, or, in worse cases, actually consuming livestock in a manner that goes far beyond any natural predation. The creature seems almost to take pleasure in the destruction of agricultural resources, in the ruination of human labour and planning, as if it harbours a specific resentment toward the farming enterprises that have transformed the Irish landscape. Records from rural communities describe entire seasons ruined by the appearance of the bull form of the Phooka. In some cases, the creature would return repeatedly throughout autumn, manifesting multiple times and creating a state of constant fear among farming families. The economic impact of these visitations extended far beyond the immediate loss of livestock. The psychological trauma created by such repeated encounters altered human behaviour and forced communities to modify their agricultural practices entirely. Some villages relocated their autumn herding to different territories, attempting to avoid the specific locations where the Phooka had previously appeared in bull form. Others developed elaborate ritual practices designed to protect their animals or to appease the creature through elaborate offerings. The Phooka in bull form possesses a territorial awareness that suggests almost human calculation. The creature does not simply roam randomly across the Irish countryside, but rather seems to favour specific locations, returning to particular territories year after year during the Samhain season. These territories often correspond to sites of significant historical events or places where the Phooka has previously achieved particularly devastating results. The creature's presence in these locations becomes almost seasonal, as reliable as the changing of the seasons themselves, creating a state of perpetual anticipation among the communities that must defend their livelihoods against this supernatural threat. The Phooka's choice of bull form at specific times and locations remains enigmatic, governed by motivations that elude human understanding entirely. Some traditions suggest that the creature manifests in this form during years of particular agricultural abundance, as if drawn by the concentration of resources to be destroyed. Others propose that the bull emerges specifically during years when a community has grown complacent about their obligations to the fairy realm, when they have forgotten the necessity of maintaining proper respect and appropriate offerings. The truth of these theories remains unknowable, buried beneath centuries of speculation and accumulated folklore. Yet the pattern of the creature's appearances remains sufficiently consistent that rural wisdom learned to anticipate the Phooka's bull form and to prepare defensive measures accordingly. Of all the forms that the Phooka assumes during Samhain's liminal hours, the most difficult to describe and perhaps the most deeply unsettling is the manifestation that witnesses speak of only reluctantly, often with visible signs of psychological distress. This is the Phooka in its hairiest form, a creature that defies categorization within the normal boundaries of animal or human, existing instead in a profoundly ambiguous state that seems deliberately designed to disturb human categorization and comfort. The witnesses who have encountered this manifestation rarely speak with clarity about what they observed, their accounts fragmented and contradictory, as if the very act of trying to impose language and logical structure upon the experience causes them genuine psychological pain. Yet these fragmentary descriptions cohere around certain consistent elements, painting a portrait of a being that is perhaps even more terrifying in its fundamental wrongness than the more dramatic manifestations of horse or eagle or bull. The body of the Phooka, in this form, suggests a creature of considerable size, though estimations vary wildly depending upon the witness and the context of the encounter. Some describe a form roughly equivalent to a large man standing upright, perhaps 6 to 7 feet in height, while others insist that the creature was far larger, towering above normal human proportions, with a frame that seemed to occupy more space than the eye could comfortably process. What all accounts agree upon is the absolute coverage of this form in thick, dark hair that extends from the topmost portions of the head all the way down to what might be considered the creature's feet, if feet is indeed the appropriate term for the appendages upon which it stands. This hair is not the regular fur of any ordinary animal, but rather appears more similar to human body hair, somehow magnified and intensified to grotesque proportions, creating a covering that is simultaneously repulsive and somehow disturbingly familiar. The texture of this hair, as described by survivors, presents contradictions that suggest the inadequacy of human sensory categories for describing something so fundamentally alien. Some witnesses speak of hair that appears coarse and brittle, like the dried filaments of some dead thing, while others describe it as possessing an almost liquid quality, as if the strands moved with independence from one another, despite their connection to the creature's body. The color shifts between descriptions from deep brown to black to grey, though these discrepancies may reflect the darkness of the Samhain night and the psychological state of witnesses experiencing profound terror. What remains consistent across accounts is the impression that the hair seems to move with a life of its own, bristling and rippling as if disturbed by winds that touch nothing else in the immediate environment, creating an impression of constant, restless motion. The face of the Phooka, in this form, proves almost impossible for survivors to articulate with any degree of clarity. Witnesses struggle to describe whether the creature possesses a face in any conventional sense, or whether the hair simply extends to create a featureless surface, interrupted only by the presence of eyes and a mouth. The eyes maintain consistency with all other manifestations of the Phooka, burning with that same infernal fire that cuts through the darkness like beacons of hellish illumination. But in this particular form, those burning eyes seem oddly vulnerable, exposed in a way that the eyes in other manifestations are not. Perhaps it is this vulnerability that makes them seem so terrifying. The intelligence behind those eyes appears even more emphasized when set within such an ambiguous and disturbing visage. The mouth, when the creature opens it, reveals nothing but absolute darkness, an abyss that seems to descend far deeper than any ordinary throat could logically extend. This form of the Phooka moves in a manner that violates normal principles of biological locomotion. The creature does not walk or gallop or fly, but rather seems to flow or slide across terrain, its movements suggesting something more akin to liquid than to solid form. Survivors describe an unsettling quality to the creature's progression, a sense that it does not so much move through space as that space somehow rearranges itself to accommodate its presence. The creature leaves no tracks, no clear evidence of its passage, yet its presence can be perceived through the disturbance in the normal order of things that follows in its wake. Animals refuse to approach the location where this form has manifested, and the very soil in such places seems to sicken and fail to produce normal vegetation for years afterward. The most significant and disturbing characteristic of this particular manifestation is its apparent selectivity regarding who it encounters. Unlike the black horse form, which seeks to entrap any traveler unfortunate enough to cross its path, or the bull form, which rages indiscriminately against livestock and property, the hairy shadow form appears almost exclusively to those individuals believed to have violated ancient taboos or broken fundamental laws of the fairy realm. The Irish tradition maintains a complex series of prohibitions and obligations regarding interaction with the other world, certain actions forbidden, and certain proprieties that must be maintained to avoid supernatural retribution. Those who have stolen from fairy communities, who have desecrated sacred sites, who have refused proper offerings, or who have committed acts of deliberate disrespect toward the fairy realm, these are the individuals most likely to encounter the Phooka in this disturbing manifestation. The appearance of the hairy shadow form serves almost as a supernatural execution of judgment, a physical manifestation of consequences for actions that have transgressed against the invisible world. Those who have survived encounters with this form speak of an overwhelming sense of being known and evaluated, of standing before an intelligence that possesses complete understanding of their transgressions and holds them accountable for their violations. The creature does not simply attack, but rather seems to torment its victims with knowledge of why it has come, imposing psychological terror that equals or exceeds the physical threat it represents. Some survivors speak of hearing voices emanating from the creature, voices that catalogue their specific violations and explain in detail the nature of their offence. Very few individuals survive encounters with the Phooka in its hairy shadow form, and those who do emerge profoundly changed by the experience. The psychological damage inflicted by such an encounter appears to transcend the capabilities of ordinary human recovery, creating survivors who exist in a state of perpetual distress and dislocation from normal society. These individuals often become obsessed with the concept of atonement, seeking ways to restore balance with the fairy realm and attempting through increasingly desperate measures to undo whatever transgression invited the creature's terrible attention. The communities that shelter such survivors learn quickly to be cautious in their presence, aware that the taint of the Phooka's judgment seems to cling to those who have been marked by the creature's presence. The Phooka does not exist as a monolithic entity with uniform characteristics distributed evenly across the entire island of Ireland. Rather, this ancient shapeshifter has adapted itself across centuries to reflect the specific geography, the unique fears, and the particular cultural concerns of individual Irish counties. Each region maintains its own version of the Phooka mythology, refined and modified through generations of storytellers who tailored the creature to resonate with local understanding and local experience. To travel from one county to another is to encounter a creature that is fundamentally the same at its core, yet distinctly different in its manifestations and behavioral patterns. Understanding these regional variations reveals the sophisticated nature of Irish folklore and the way that communities adapted universal fears into locally meaningful narratives. In County Waterford, the Phooka is known particularly for its association with specific waterways and crossings. The creature in this region is said to favour fords and bridge approaches, positioning itself to intercept travellers during the dangerous hours when darkness makes navigation difficult and when the veil between worlds grows thin. Waterford's Phooka takes the black horse form with particular frequency in this county, and witnesses report that the creature seems especially attracted to travellers who have failed to properly acknowledge the water spirits that inhabit the region's rivers and streams. The locals of County Waterford developed an elaborate system of water-based rituals designed specifically to appease their regional Phooka. Offerings left at river crossings and specific words spoken aloud when approaching bridges at dusk or dawn. County Down's version of the Phooka possesses a reputation for greater unpredictability and violence than its counterparts in other regions. The shapeshifter in this northern county is spoken of with a tone suggesting that negotiation with it is virtually impossible, that it operates according to motivations entirely incomprehensible to human understanding. Downs communities develop defenses against their Phooka that emphasize avoidance rather than appeasement, patterns of behavior specifically designed to minimize the possibility of encounter, rather than to manage such encounters if they occur. The creature in County Down is said to take the bull form with particular frequency, emerging specifically to devastate livestock and to destroy the agricultural resources upon which farming families depend for survival. In County Cork, the Phooka mythology incorporates elements of maritime danger and coastal peril. The creature in this southwestern county shows a particular affinity for manifestations near cliffs and promontories, locations where the land itself transitions abruptly into open ocean. Cork's Phooka is said to favour the eagle form when manifesting along the coastline, using its aerial superiority to hunt travellers who must necessarily negotiate the dangerous roads that wind along the cliffs. The locals developed an intimate understanding of the creature's patterns, learning to predict with relative accuracy when and where the Phooka would appear during specific Samhain seasons. This knowledge proved valuable, not for providing complete protection, but for allowing communities to prepare themselves mentally and spiritually for the creature's inevitable arrival. County Galway's Phooka mythology emphasizes the creature's connection to ancient sites and to locations of significant spiritual or historical power. The shapeshifter in this region seems to concentrate its activities around places where the veil between worlds is known to be particularly thin, locations that predate Christianity and that retain their sacred power despite centuries of human settlement and modification. Galway's communities developed an understanding of the Phooka, not merely as a creature of danger, but as a guardian of these ancient places, a being charged with ensuring that human beings maintain appropriate respect and distance from these sites. The creature's attacks in this region are often interpreted not as random predation, but as deliberate enforcement of boundaries and as punishment for those who have violated the sanctity of these sacred locations. County Sligo's version of the Phooka integrates deeply with the region's mountain topography and its history of ancient warrior cultures. The creature in this northwestern county is said to favour high places, manifesting on the slopes of mountains and along ridges, where it can survey vast territories. Sligo's folklore suggests that the Phooka in this region maintains a connection to the ancient warriors and heroes who once ruled these lands, as if the creature serves as a supernatural extension of that warrior tradition. The hairy shadow form of the Phooka appears with particular frequency in County Sligo, emerging most often as punishment for those who have broken oaths or who have violated the codes of honour that the region's tradition maintains as fundamental to proper human conduct. County Donegal's Phooka mythology emphasises extreme isolation and distance from normal human settlement. The creature in this northernmost county is said to favour wilderness areas and locations far removed from any human habitation, suggesting a Phooka that is more interested in defending its own territorial domain than in actively hunting human prey. Donegal's tradition maintains that the creature in this region is particularly bound by formal protocols and rules, that it will adhere strictly to agreements and understandings if humans approach negotiations with proper respect and appropriate ritual. This regional variation suggests a Phooka that is less capricious and less randomly dangerous than its counterparts elsewhere, though no less terrible in its potential impact for those foolish enough to violate the agreements that govern interaction with the creature. County Tipperary's Phooka mythology centres on agricultural cycles and the rhythms of the farming year. The creature in this central region is understood as particularly connected to the moments of transition between seasons, manifesting with greatest intensity during times of greatest agricultural activity. Tipperary's communities developed an elaborate system of offerings and ritual observances designed to mark each seasonal transition and to appease the Phooka throughout the year, not merely during Samhain, but at each significant point in the calendar. The creature in this region is often interpreted as fulfilling a necessary function, a being that helps to mark and preserve the proper order of the seasons, and that punishes those who attempt to circumvent or manipulate the natural cycles of growth and harvest. County Limerick's Phooka carries associations with trade and commerce, with river traffic and the movement of goods through the region. The creature in this region is said to favour locations where human economic activity concentrates, manifesting near markets and, along the roads, that merchants travel. Limerick's tradition suggests that the Phooka serves as a regulator of commercial activity, a supernatural force that ensures that trade remains fair and that merchants do not engage in practices that would violate the proper order of commerce. The creature's attacks in this region are often understood as enforcement of commercial morality, punishing those who have cheated or defrauded, who have stolen or engaged in deceitful practices. These regional variations demonstrate the sophisticated way that Irish culture adapted the Phooka mythology to local conditions and local concerns. Rather than existing as a fixed and unchanging creature, the Phooka proves flexible and adaptive, capable of serving multiple cultural functions simultaneously across different geographic and social contexts. Yet beneath these variations lies a common core of understanding. The Phooka is ancient, intelligent, and demands respect, and those who fail to properly acknowledge the creature's presence, or who violate the protocols governing interaction with the fairy realm, will face supernatural consequences. The Phooka does not hunt randomly across the entire expanse of Irish geography, nor does it manifest with equal frequency in every location. Instead, this ancient shapeshifter maintains a profound connection to specific places, sites that carry within them layers of historical significance, spiritual power, and accumulated human tragedy. These sacred places function almost as territory claimed by the creature, regions where the Phooka's presence is not merely possible, but virtually inevitable as Samhain approaches. To understand the geography of terror that defines Irish Samhain, tradition is to recognize that fear itself becomes concentrated in specific locations, creating zones of supernatural danger that communities learn to identify and, where possible, to avoid. The bridges that span Ireland's rivers occupy a particular significance in Phooka mythology. These liminal structures, existing at the boundary between separated lands and representing the transition from one place to another, seem to naturally attract the shapeshifter's attention. Certain bridges have achieved legendary status for their association with Phooka encounters. The bridge at Athboy in County Meath, the crossing near Glenveigh in County Donegal, and the bridge spanning the Suir River in County Tipperary all maintain long traditions of reported Phooka activity. These locations function almost as hunting grounds, places where the creature regularly stations itself during Samhain week, waiting for travelers foolish or desperate enough to attempt crossing during darkness. The wisdom passed down through generations strongly advises against crossing these particular bridges between sunset and sunrise during the week of Samhain. Crossroads throughout Ireland carry similar significance in the Phooka mythology. The intersection of two or more roads represents a point of maximum vulnerability in human terms, a location where travelers must make choices, where multiple paths diverge, and where the clarity of direction becomes uncertain. The Phooka seems drawn to such locations, manifesting at crossroads with sufficient frequency that local communities develop specific protective rituals to be performed at these points. Some crossroads have names forever associated with Phooka encounters. The crossing at Maynooth bears a local reputation so strong that most travellers plan their journeys to avoid this intersection during the liminal nights. Others, like the crossroads near Tara in County Meath, are avoided entirely during Samhain season. The paths simply left untravelled until the danger period passes. Hills and elevated places throughout Ireland maintain their own connection to Phooka manifestation. The creature in its bull form seems particularly drawn to high ground, locations from which the landscape below can be surveyed completely. Mountains, in particular, function as territories claimed by the Phooka, peaks where the creature manifests with such regularity that local communities developed elaborate systems of belief regarding the proper way to traverse these mountains during Samhain. In County Wicklow, the high passes are simply abandoned during Samhain week. Travellers plan their journeys to avoid any mountain crossing during this period. In County Kerry, the mountain communities maintain traditions of leaving offerings at specific high points, attempting through ritual action to secure safe passage for those who must necessarily traverse these dangerous territories. Water crossings beyond simple bridges acquire supernatural significance in the Phooka geography of terror. Fords where rivers become shallow enough for crossing on foot or horseback seem to concentrate the creature's attention in a manner that suggests deliberate intent. The Phooka appears to understand that such locations represent crucial choke points for human travel, places where the crossing must occur and where escaping the creature's attention becomes nearly impossible. County Waterford in particular shows a concentration of dangerous fords. Locations where Phooka encounters occur with such predictable frequency that the fords acquire names that translate roughly as the place where the Phooka waits or the crossing of terror. Ancient sites possess a particular resonance with Phooka manifestation. Locations that predate Christian settlement, stone circles, burial mounds, and sites associated with pre-Christian religious practices seem to attract the creature with special intensity. These places carry within them accumulated spiritual power, residual energy from centuries of human ritual and belief. The Phooka seems drawn to this power, as if the creature itself is anchored to these ancient locations and obligated to defend or enforce proper respect for these sacred sites. In County Meath, the ancient complex at Tara maintains a reputation for intense Phooka activity during Samhain, as if the creature serves as a supernatural custodian of this historically significant location. Places of historical tragedy or death acquire particular significance in the Phooka mapping. Locations where battles occurred, where people died violently, or where significant suffering took place seem to accumulate supernatural activity. The Phooka manifests with particular intensity at such locations, as if the creature feeds upon or is drawn to sites saturated with human suffering. The fields of ancient battles throughout Ireland carry reputations as zones of maximum danger during Samhain. Local communities maintain traditions suggesting that the Phooka in these locations is particularly dangerous, more violent, and less amenable to negotiation than the creature at other sites, as if the accumulated tragedy of the location somehow intensifies the creature's malevolence. Solitary trees and groves maintain their own connection to Phooka activity. A single ancient tree standing alone in open landscape, or a grove of trees in otherwise bare terrain, seems to function as gathering places for the creature. These locations carry the status of fairy forts or enchanted sites within Irish tradition, places where the boundary between the human world and the fairy realm grows particularly thin. The Phooka appears to favour these arboreal sites for manifestation, possibly because the trees themselves carry ancient power and provide supernatural anchors. Communities developed strong prohibitions against disturbing these trees or groves, understanding intuitively that to damage such a site would would invite the Phooka's most terrible retribution. The cliffs and promontories that define Ireland's coastline acquire special significance in regions where the Phooka manifests in its eagle form. These locations, where land abruptly transitions into ocean, seem to concentrate the creature's aerial hunting. County Clare's cliffs have acquired legendary status in this regard, the dramatic geography apparently creating ideal conditions for the Phooka's aerial manifestations. Coastal communities in these regions develop specific protocols for avoiding the cliff edges during Samhain, understanding that these locations represented zones of maximum danger for aerial predation. These sacred places collectively form a geography of terror that structures Irish understanding of the Phooka and its seasonal threat. To know these places is to understand the danger. To avoid them during Samhain is to acknowledge the creature's presence and to show appropriate respect. The consistency with which these locations accumulate Phooka encounters across centuries suggests something more than mere folklore. It suggests that the Irish people recognized genuine patterns of danger and encoded these patterns within their cultural memory as protective wisdom. Beneath the terror and the supernatural manifestations of the Phooka lies a profound truth about the relationship between human agricultural communities and the forces that govern fertility, growth, and the seasonal cycles that sustain life itself. The Phooka exists not merely as a creature of random destruction, but as an entity fundamentally connected to the harvest cycle, to the final reaping of crops, and the transition from abundance to scarcity that marks the passage from autumn into winter. This connection manifests in one of the most significant and enduring traditions in Irish folklore: the practice of leaving the last sheaf of grain in the field as an offering to the Phooka. This ritual, maintained across centuries and across nearly every region of Ireland, represents far more than simple superstition. It embodies a complex covenant between the human agricultural world and the supernatural forces that govern fertility and growth. The tradition of the final sheaf operates according to a logic that reveals sophisticated understanding of both practical agriculture and spiritual necessity. At the conclusion of harvest, when all the grain has been cut and bundled except for one final portion of standing stalks, the farmers would deliberately leave these last stalks unharvested in the field. This final sheaf was never gathered by human hands, never brought into the barn with the other grain, never processed or stored for human use. Instead, it remained standing in the field throughout the remainder of autumn and into early winter, a visible offering left specifically for the Phooka. The location of this final sheaf was not random but carefully considered, typically positioned in a location particularly associated with the creature's presence, or in a place where offerings would be most visible and most likely to be acknowledged by the supernatural entity being honored. The motivations underlying this practice operated at multiple levels simultaneously, revealing the practical wisdom embedded within Irish folklore. At the most basic level, leaving the final sheaf represented an act of appeasement, a concrete gift offered to the Phooka to encourage the creature to refrain from destroying the harvest that had been gathered. The logic was straightforward. If the Phooka received a meaningful offering, if the creature was acknowledged and respected through a concrete action rather than mere words, then perhaps the shapeshifter could be convinced to depart without inflicting the devastation it was capable of producing. The alternative, a Phooka denied its due respect, resulted in the destruction of crops, the slaughter of livestock, and the economic devastation of families who had labored the entire growing season. Beyond this protective function, however, the final sheaf tradition carried deeper significance rooted in the ancient understanding of fertility and growth. In pre-Christian Irish society, the last sheaf was understood to contain within itself a spiritual essence or embodiment of the grain spirit itself. The act of leaving this sheaf standing was not merely an offering to the Phooka, but also a way of preserving the vital force that governed growth and reproduction, ensuring that this essential power would be available to animate next year's crops. By leaving the final sheaf untouched and unharvested, farmers believed they were maintaining a spiritual continuity with the land itself and preserving the conditions necessary for future fertility. The Phooka, in this interpretation, served almost as a custodian of this vital force, a being that would protect and preserve it through the winter months until it could be regenerated at the beginning of the next growing season. The practice acquired additional significance when connected to the concept of greed and excess. Farmers who attempted to harvest every single stalk of grain, who refused to leave even one final sheaf for the Phooka, were understood to be acting in violation of fundamental laws governing the relationship between humans and the natural world. Such greed, the desire to maximize yield without acknowledging the supernatural forces that governed growth and fertility, was believed to invite the creature's wrath in the most severe forms. Stories circulated throughout Irish communities describing what happened to farmers who broke this covenant. Entire harvests destroyed, livestock mysteriously vanishing, or worse, the farmer themselves falling victim to one of the Phooka's terrible rides from which they might not return. Regional variations in the tradition reflected local agricultural practices and local understandings of proper appeasement. In some areas, the final sheaf was tied together in elaborate knots, designed to resemble human or animal forms, creating a symbolic representation that the Phooka might occupy during its visits. In other regions, the final sheaf was left untied and unharvested, allowed to gradually disintegrate naturally throughout the winter months. Some communities maintained the belief that the final sheaf should be positioned so that it received the first rays of dawn on Samhain morning, or positioned to face in specific directions believed to correspond to the Phooka's primary dwelling places. These variations demonstrate how local communities adapted the basic tradition to their specific circumstances while maintaining the essential principle. The Phooka must receive acknowledgement and respect through a concrete offering. The practice of leaving the final sheaf extended beyond simple agricultural ritual into the realm of economic and social obligation. Families that failed to leave the final sheaf faced not only supernatural consequences, but also community judgment and social ostracism. A farmer known to have violated this tradition might find themselves isolated within their community, viewed with suspicion and fear, as if their violation of the covenant had somehow tainted them spiritually. The community understood intuitively that the Phooka's wrath, when invoked through such violation, might not fall solely upon the offending farmer, but could spread to neighboring properties and affect the harvest of multiple families. This collective understanding reinforced the tradition and ensured that even the most skeptical or greedy farmer faced enormous social pressure to comply with the practice. The timing of the offering held equal importance to the offering itself. The final sheaf must be left in the field by the conclusion of harvest, but many communities maintained that it should remain undisturbed until specific dates had passed, often until the first day of winter, or even until the beginning of spring. To retrieve the final sheaf before the proper time had passed was understood to be a violation of the covenant with the Phooka, an act that might provoke the creature's revenge, as surely as refusing to leave the sheaf in the first place. Some communities developed elaborate ritual procedures for finally harvesting this last sheaf when the proper time arrived, treating the process with ceremonial significance and speaking specific words of gratitude to the Phooka for its protection during the winter months. The connection between this harvest bargain and the broader relationship between human communities and the fairy realm reveals the sophistication of Irish supernatural understanding. The Phooka was not viewed merely as a dangerous creature to be feared and avoided, but as an entity occupying a specific role within the broader cosmic order. Through the ritual of the final sheaf, Irish farmers acknowledged that they existed within a world shared with supernatural forces, that the fertility of their land depended upon maintaining proper relationships with these forces, and that respecting the Phooka's presence and authority was integral to human survival and prosperity. This ancient covenant, maintained for centuries and across generations, demonstrates how Irish culture integrated practical necessity with spiritual belief, creating traditions that served both material and psychological functions simultaneously. The final sheaf stands as testament to human wisdom in negotiating coexistence with forces beyond human control, acknowledging that some powers must be respected rather than conquered. The question of timing possesses profound significance when attempting to understand the Phooka and its role within the broader cosmology of Irish supernatural belief. Why does this creature manifest with such intensity, specifically during Samhain? Why does this particular moment in the calendar year seem to activate the Phooka in ways that no other season or celebration achieves? The answer to these questions reveals something fundamental about the nature of Samhain itself, and about the role that the Phooka occupies within the liminal space that this sacred night creates. Samhain represents far more than a simple calendar marking. It embodies a genuine rupture in the normal order of time and reality, a moment when the boundaries that usually separate the worlds become negotiable, when the rules that govern existence itself lose their authority. Samhain originated in ancient Celtic culture as a festival marking the end of summer and the beginning of the darker half of the year. The Celts understood the calendar as divided into two primary seasons: the light season beginning on the festival of Beltane, and the dark season commencing with Samhain. This division was not merely a practical matter of noting seasonal change, but carried profound spiritual and cosmological significance. The dark season represented a time when the boundary between the living and the dead grew thin, when the barrier between the human world and the realm of the supernatural became permeable, and when interaction between these normally separated domains became possible in ways that defied ordinary understanding. Samhain, as the threshold point marking this transition, occupied a unique position as the most spiritually volatile night of the entire year. The Phooka's intensified manifestation during Samhain represents a response to these fundamental changes in the structure of reality itself. During the ordinary months of the year, the creature exists in a state of relative restraint, confined by the firm boundaries that separate the supernatural from the natural world. The creature remains present within Irish folklore and within the landscape, capable of manifesting and of causing harm, yet somehow constrained by the normal order of things. As Samhain approaches, however, these constraints begin to weaken. The accumulated spiritual energy of the darkening season, the convergence of the living and the dead, and the general loosening of reality's structure create conditions under which the Phooka can operate with minimal restraint. The creature becomes increasingly active as Samhain night approaches, and on that single terrible night, when the veil between worlds reaches its absolute minimum, the Phooka emerges in full power, constrained only by the most ancient and fundamental laws governing interaction between human and fairy realms. The Phooka functions almost as a supernatural enforcer during this liminal period, a being responsible for ensuring that the rules governing the boundary between worlds are maintained and respected. As the barrier between realms grows thin, and as humans become capable of glimpsing into territories normally hidden from mortal perception, the Phooka emerges as a gatekeeper and regulator. The creature enforces the ancient laws that govern Samhain night, punishing those who violate taboos, who forget the necessity of proper respect, or who attempt to exploit the thinning of the veil for purposes deemed inappropriate or dangerous. In this sense, the Phooka serves a necessary function. Without the creature's enforcement of supernatural law, the consequences of Samhain might prove catastrophic, with humans and supernatural entities engaging in uncontrolled interaction that could fundamentally damage the structure of reality itself. The connection between the Phooka's manifestation and the conclusion of the harvest cycle runs deeper than simple seasonal coincidence. In pre-Christian Celtic understanding, Samhain marked not only the end of summer, but also the final completion of the agricultural year. The harvest had been gathered, the last grain left in the field as offering to the fairy realm, and the long process of agricultural labor had concluded. This moment represented a transition point between two states of existence: the abundance and activity of the growing season, giving way to the scarcity and dormancy of winter. The Phooka, in its role as marker and enforcer of this transition, emerges with particular intensity during this liminal period, precisely because the stakes involved in this transition are so profound. The Phooka ensures that communities maintain proper acknowledgement of the agricultural forces that have sustained them, that they demonstrate appropriate gratitude, and that they prepare themselves spiritually and materially for the long months of winter that lie ahead. Winter's approach intensifies the Phooka's presence in ways that go beyond simple seasonal pattern. The darker months represent a time when the barrier between the material and the supernatural grows progressively thinner, and when supernatural entities possess greater power and greater freedom of action. The Phooka, understanding this shift, begins its active season at precisely the moment when it possesses maximum capability. The creature's appearance during this period serves almost as an announcement, a supernatural declaration that the normal rules of the world have been suspended, and that human beings must recalibrate their understanding of safety and danger. Those who fail to heed this announcement, who continue moving through the world according to ordinary protocols and assumptions, find themselves particularly vulnerable to the creature's predations. The Phooka's role as guardian of the liminal period extends to its enforcement of ancient protocols regarding human behavior during Samhain itself. Specific taboos governed what humans should and should not do during this dangerous night. Fires must be lit in specific ways to protect communities. Certain tasks must not be undertaken. Travel must be minimized, and proper offerings must be made to the supernatural entities that emerge from their hidden realms. The Phooka serves as enforcer of these protocols, targeting with particular ferocity those individuals who violate the ancient laws through ignorance or deliberate disrespect. A person who travels alone on Samhain night despite warnings, who fails to properly acknowledge the Phooka's presence, or who ignores the traditional protocols for surviving this dangerous period, becomes a natural target for the creature's attention. The temporal nature of the Phooka's manifestation reveals something profound about how Irish culture understood time itself. Rather than viewing time as a continuous, uniform progression, the Celtic understanding recognized certain moments as fundamentally different from others. Moments when time itself transforms, and when the normal rules cease to apply. Samhain represented such a moment, a time when the progression of the calendar literally paused and when a timeless space opened, a space separate from ordinary history where supernatural and human entities could interact according to different principles. The Phooka, emerging precisely during this temporal rupture, becomes associated with time itself, with the regulation and enforcement of temporal boundaries, and with the necessary transitions between one state of being and another. Understanding the Phooka as Samhain's guardian requires abandoning conventional thinking about morality and danger. The creature is not evil in any simple moral sense, nor is it merely a force of destruction. Rather, the Phooka occupies a necessary position within the cosmic order, serving functions that Irish culture understood as essential to the maintenance of reality's structure. The creature's violence and terror serve purposes that transcend simple predation. they function as enforcement mechanisms ensuring that humans maintain proper respect for the supernatural realm, and that the ancient protocols governing coexistence between worlds remain observed and honoured. To understand the Phooka solely through the lens of terror and danger would be to fundamentally misrepresent the nature of this creature and to miss the profound complexity that Irish culture embedded within its portrayal. The shapeshifter exists not as a simple embodiment of evil, not as a straightforward monster to be universally feared and avoided, but rather as an entity possessed of a duality that defies easy categorization into conventional moral frameworks. The Phooka is neither good nor evil in any sense that human morality would comprehend. Rather, it is primordial, intelligent, and deeply alien to human understanding, operating according to principles and motivations that remain fundamentally inscrutable to mortal minds. This fundamental ambiguity, this refusal to collapse into simple moral categories, represents perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of the Phooka mythology and speaks volumes about the sophisticated understanding of supernatural forces that Irish culture maintained across centuries. The accounts of survivors who have encountered the Phooka and lived to tell the tale reveal patterns that suggest the creature is capable of restraint and even of acts that might charitably be interpreted as protective. Some survivors speak of rides that, while supernatural and profoundly disorienting, resulted in the rider being deposited safely at a location distant from where they began, having been transported to safety, perhaps from a danger they had not yet perceived. Others describe experiences where the Phooka's attention seemed to divert them from a path that would have led directly into genuine peril, a cliff edge avoided, a treacherous ford bypassed, a location of legitimate danger circumvented. These accounts suggest that the creature's motivations extend beyond simple predation, and that the Phooka might operate according to understandings of danger and safety that diverge significantly from human assessment. The tradition maintains numerous stories of communities that developed working relationships with their regional Phooka through the maintenance of proper offerings and through rigorous adherence to the protocols governing interaction with the creature. In these accounts, the Phooka functions almost as a protector, defending the community against other supernatural threats and ensuring that the boundaries of their territory remain respected by hostile entities. Such stories suggest that the Phooka, when treated with appropriate respect and when provided with the offerings it demands, can function as a beneficial force, a supernatural ally capable of providing protection and assistance that extends far beyond the mere absence of predation. The creature's role transforms in these narratives from active threat into something approaching spiritual partnership, a relationship between human community and supernatural entity based upon mutual recognition and reciprocal obligation. The Phooka's apparent capacity for warning and communication suggests intelligence and intention that goes far beyond simple animal instinct or mindless supernatural malevolence. Some accounts describe survivors hearing voices emanating from the creature, voices that seem to carry actual communication rather than mere sounds. These voices allegedly convey warnings about upcoming dangers, revelations about hidden facts the listener needs to know, or explanations regarding why the Phooka has chosen to interact with this particular human at this particular moment. If these accounts possess any degree of truth, they suggest that the Phooka is capable of deliberately sharing information with humans, of warning them about dangers they might not otherwise perceive, and of attempting to alter human behavior through direct communication rather than through predatory action. The distinction between the Phooka's treatment of those who show proper respect and those who demonstrate arrogance or disrespect reveals something important about the creature's moral framework, even if that framework remains alien to human understanding. The creature appears to respond to human behavior, adjusting its actions based upon the attitudes and actions of specific individuals. a person who approaches the Phooka with genuine respect, who acknowledges the creature's power and ancient nature, who demonstrates awareness of the protocols governing interaction with the fairy realm, seems to receive treatment markedly different from someone who demonstrates arrogance, disrespect, or greedy violation of ancient laws. This responsiveness to human behavior suggests that the Phooka is not a force of blind destruction, but an entity capable of making judgments about human character and worthiness. The concept of the Phooka as teacher or enforcer of ancient wisdom adds another dimension to the creature's moral complexity. Rather than viewing the Phooka as a simple predator or random destroyer, some Irish tradition frames the creature as a necessary force that ensures humans maintain knowledge of and respect for the ancient world, for the supernatural realm, and for the protocols that govern coexistence between human and fairy domains. In this interpretation, the Phooka's violence serves an educational function, teaching communities through terrible experience what must not be forgotten, what must not be violated, and what fundamental respect must be maintained. The creature becomes almost a punitive teacher, inflicting suffering not from malice, but from commitment to maintaining necessary standards of behavior and consciousness. The Phooka's apparent willingness to negotiate with humans who approach correctly suggests that even within the creature's predatory nature exists capacity for reasoning and for establishing mutually beneficial arrangements. Stories exist throughout Irish tradition describing individuals or communities that successfully negotiated with the Phooka, establishing terms regarding which roads would remain safe for human passage, which offerings would guarantee protection from predation, and what behaviors would trigger the creature's wrath versus what actions would secure its forbearance. If these accounts possess validity, they suggest that the Phooka is not utterly alien in its thinking, but rather capable of understanding human concerns and working toward arrangements that could theoretically benefit both parties. The Phooka's role in maintaining the health and fertility of the land itself suggests that the creature's presence serves functions that extend far beyond simple terror or destruction. The creature's connection to the harvest cycle, its apparent investment in ensuring that proper protocols are maintained regarding offerings of grain, and its manifestation precisely at the moments of greatest seasonal transition, all suggest that the Phooka functions as something approaching a steward of natural forces. The creature's violence, viewed from this perspective, emerges as serving a necessary ecological and spiritual function. Enforcement of the protocols required to maintain the land's fertility and the continuation of the cycles that sustain human communities. The Phooka becomes not merely a danger to be survived, but an essential force maintaining the conditions necessary for human survival itself. This duality, the simultaneous capacity for terror and for protection, the creature's simultaneous role as threat and as potential ally, represents perhaps the most essential characteristic of the Phooka and of Irish supernatural understanding more broadly. The creature cannot be defeated or eliminated because its presence serves necessary functions within the cosmic order. It cannot be trusted completely because its motivations remain fundamentally alien to human comprehension. Yet, it can be negotiated with, respected, and potentially allied with through proper understanding and appropriate action. The Phooka embodies the principle that the most powerful and dangerous forces in existence are not necessarily evil, and that coexistence with such forces requires not destruction, but rather understanding, respect, and maintenance of proper protocols. The evidence for the Phooka's existence and the reality of its manifestations does not rest upon speculation or mere folklore divorced from historical documentation. Rather, across nearly 2 centuries, the Irish Folklore Commission and various collectors of Irish cultural knowledge systematically gathered and preserved testimonies from individuals who claimed direct experience with the Phooka or who had witnessed the creature's manifestations. These archival records, preserved in Irish institutions and in private collections, represent a remarkable historical document of collective belief and reported experience. The consistency of these accounts across geographic regions, across time periods, and across social classes speaks to something more than mere invention or shared delusion. Instead, these voices from the past testify to a phenomenon that demanded explanation and understanding, that produced profound effects upon those who encountered it, and that shaped Irish culture and behaviour in measurable ways. The Commission's archival materials contain hundreds of detailed accounts from Irish speakers describing Phooka encounters, each testimony unique in its specifics, yet remarkably consistent in certain fundamental elements. A farmer from County Waterford describes witnessing the black horse form of the creature at a bridge crossing, recounting details about the animal's appearance, its supernatural luminosity, and the overwhelming compulsion he felt to approach the creature, despite his conscious awareness that doing so would be catastrophic. An elderly woman from County Donegal provides a detailed account of her grandfather's experience with the aerial Phooka, describing his traumatic encounter with the monstrous eagle and the lasting psychological damage he suffered as a result. A merchant from Cork recalls the destruction wrought by the bull form upon a herd of cattle, describing the terror that gripped the region and the desperate attempts by farmers to protect their livestock from the creature's predations. What distinguishes these archival accounts from mere folklore is the specificity of detail and the internal consistency that characterizes nearly all the testimonies. Witnesses describe the Phooka's physical characteristics with remarkable consistency across accounts that were collected from different regions and from individuals who had no apparent knowledge of each other's experiences. The burning eyes, the supernatural proportions, the impossible nature of the creature's movements, and the profound psychological impact of encounters all appear in accounts separated by decades and by significant geographic distance. This consistency suggests either a remarkable degree of cultural transmission of folklore details, or, alternatively, that these accounts represent documentation of actual experiences with something that produced similar effects across multiple individuals and multiple time periods. The temporal patterns described in these archival materials demonstrate remarkable agreement regarding when and where Phooka manifestations occur. The overwhelming majority of documented accounts cluster around the Samhain season, with most occurring during the week immediately preceding and following the festival itself. Accounts from summer months or from early spring are virtually absent from the archival record, while accounts from the months of September and November show particular concentration. This temporal clustering cannot be easily explained as mere folkloric invention, but rather suggests a phenomenon that genuinely follows seasonal patterns, and that demonstrates apparent cyclical nature consistent across many reported instances. The testimonies regarding specific locations demonstrate equally consistent patterns. Certain bridges, certain crossroads, and certain hills appear in multiple accounts as sites of repeated Phooka manifestation. The bridge at Athboy in County Meath appears in at least 17 separate accounts collected across 5 decades, each testimony describing similar manifestations at this location and each adding details that cohere with the others. Glenveigh in County Donegal similarly appears in multiple accounts, each describing encounters with the Phooka at or near this location. This geographic clustering suggests either that particular locations held cultural significance that attracted Phooka stories, or that these locations possessed genuine characteristics that made them particularly likely sites for manifestation of the phenomenon being documented. The archival materials reveal patterns in the types of individuals who report encountering the Phooka. Travelers and merchants appear with disproportionate frequency, as do farmers and rural laborers whose work required them to journey during evening or early morning hours. The accounts suggest that the Phooka's encounters correlate strongly with solitary travel, with travel along rural roads, and with travel during the darker hours when visibility is limited. Very few accounts describe indoor encounters or manifestations within populated villages, suggesting that the creature's manifestations follow patterns consistent with predatory behavior that would naturally cluster in isolated locations where human witnesses would be vulnerable and where escape would be difficult. Many accounts contain details that would have been difficult for folklore to invent without actual observation to guide the descriptions. A survivor's account of the sensation of ascending into impossible heights during the Phooka's ride describes physiological symptoms consistent with rapid altitude gain, difficulty breathing, the sensation of expanding air pressure in the ears, visual distortions. An account from an individual claiming to have encountered the bull form describes specific details about how the creature's hooves struck stone, the particular quality of the flames emerging from its nostrils, and the sound of its movement, details that seem difficult to fabricate without genuine observation to inform the description. The archival record also documents the psychological aftermath that survivors experienced following Phooka encounters. Multiple accounts describe lasting trauma, persistent nightmares, difficulty sleeping, and a permanent alteration in how survivors perceived reality. Some documented survivors became obsessed with understanding the nature of the creature they had encountered, spending years studying folklore and attempting to develop protective protocols. Others withdrew from normal society, becoming hermits or monks in monasteries where they hoped to find spiritual protection and peace. The consistency of these psychological consequences across multiple individuals suggests that Phooka encounters, whatever their ultimate nature, produce genuine and profound psychological effects upon those who experience them. The archival materials preserved in Irish institutions represent one of the most significant collections of supernatural testimony ever systematically documented by any culture. Rather than dismissing these accounts as mere folklore or invention, contemporary analysis recognizes them as valuable historical documentation of cultural beliefs, reported experiences, and phenomena that demanded explanation and response from Irish communities. Whether the Phooka represents a genuine supernatural entity, a cultural phenomenon with deep psychological roots, or something else entirely, the archival record testifies to its reality as a force that shaped Irish consciousness, altered human behavior, and influenced cultural practices for centuries. The accumulated wisdom of Irish culture regarding survival of Phooka encounters was not merely theoretical speculation, but rather hard-won knowledge refined across centuries through the trial and error of countless individuals. This protective knowledge, encoded within folklore and ritual practice, represented nothing less than a survival guide for those unfortunate enough to find themselves confronted by the shapeshifter during Samhain's dangerous nights. To understand these protective protocols is to recognize that Irish culture developed sophisticated strategies for coexisting with supernatural forces that could not be eliminated or defeated, but rather had to be managed, negotiated with, and respected according to carefully maintained rules and understandings. The difference between survival and destruction in a Phooka encounter often depended upon knowledge of and adherence to these ancient protocols, making this wisdom literally a matter of life and death for those who travelled the Irish roads during the liminal season. The most fundamental principle underlying all protective strategies was the importance of respect. To encounter the Phooka and survive required approaching the creature with acknowledgement of its power, recognition of its ancient nature, and genuine acceptance of its right to exist and to exercise authority within its claimed territories. This respect could not be feigned or merely performed. The Phooka possessed sufficient intelligence to perceive genuine reverence from false ceremony, and attempts to deceive the creature through performative respect were more likely to provoke its wrath than to secure protection. The proper attitude toward the Phooka involved complete acceptance that the creature was superior in power, in knowledge, and in its claims upon the land, and that human survival depended upon acknowledging this hierarchy rather than attempting to challenge or resist it. The power of spoken words and specific invocations held significant protective value in encounters with the Phooka. Certain phrases, names, and appeals to specific protective entities were believed to carry supernatural force, capable of limiting or deflecting the creature's predatory actions. Some traditions maintained that speaking the true name of a saint or invoking the protection of specific holy figures could create a barrier between the speaker and the Phooka, a supernatural boundary that the creature could not cross. Other protocols involved specific words of greeting or acknowledgement that demonstrated the speaker's awareness of the creature's presence and their willingness to enter into proper relationship with the entity rather than ignoring or denying it. The exact formulations of these protective invocations varied by region and by specific traditions, yet the principle remained consistent. Spoken words possessed power when delivered with genuine intention and proper understanding. The use of iron represented another crucial element in the protective arsenal against Phooka manifestation. This metal possessed profound significance throughout Celtic and Irish folklore as a substance with inherent power against supernatural entities. Carrying iron, wearing iron, or positioning iron objects as protective talismans created barriers that many supernatural creatures found difficult or impossible to cross. A traveler equipped with iron implements, a horseshoe, an iron knife, an iron nail, possessed substantially increased likelihood of surviving a Phooka encounter, though the protection iron offered was not absolute and depended heavily upon whether the individual possessed genuine knowledge of how to properly deploy these protective objects. The power of iron seemed to derive from its fundamental opposition to the nature of supernatural forces, as if the metal's weight and materiality created friction with the ethereal nature of creatures like the Phooka. The concept of offerings and appeasement extended beyond the formal practice of leaving the final sheaf of grain. Those traveling during Samhain season who sought to avoid Phooka encounters were advised to carry small offerings with them, items of value or substance that could be presented to the creature if an encounter occurred. These offerings functioned not as bribes in the conventional sense, but rather as tokens of respect and acknowledgement, tangible expressions of the traveler's willingness to recognize the creature's authority and to enter into proper relationship with it. The specific items carried as offerings varied: bread, coins, articles of personal value, though the principle remained consistent. To possess something to offer the Phooka demonstrated that the traveler understood the protocols governing encounter and was prepared to engage with the creature according to these ancient understandings. The location of one's travel and the specific routes chosen during Samhain carried significant bearing upon the likelihood of encountering the Phooka. Those possessing knowledge of the creature's territorial preferences could often successfully navigate around the creature's known hunting grounds, choosing routes that avoided the bridges, crossroads, and specific locations where Phooka manifestations occurred with greatest frequency. This geographical knowledge, accumulated over generations and refined through constant observation, allowed communities and individual travelers to minimize exposure to danger without necessarily requiring direct confrontation with the creature. However, some routes possessed no alternatives. Certain crossings and certain roads could not be avoided without substantial additional travel, forcing individuals to risk traversing the creature's territory while armed only with protective knowledge and appropriate respect. The practice of traveling in groups rather than alone significantly increased the likelihood of survival for those venturing into Phooka territories during dangerous seasons. The creature appeared to show less interest in groups than in solitary travelers, suggesting that the Phooka either found isolated prey more appealing, or that group presence somehow diminished the creature's capacity for successful predation. Multiple witnesses could corroborate encounters, and collective presence seemed to provide some degree of supernatural protection beyond mere practical safety in numbers. Communities maintained this understanding so consistently that solo travel during Samhain was viewed as recklessness bordering on suicide, a violation of basic prudence that demonstrated either profound ignorance or dangerous arrogance. The timing of travel proved similarly crucial to survival strategy. Attempting to traverse potentially dangerous territories during daylight hours represented far superior strategy to night travel, as the Phooka manifested most frequently during darkness and possessed apparent preference for hunting, when visibility limited human ability to detect and respond to danger. Those forced to travel at night were advised to maintain constant vigilance, to travel along known routes, and to avoid stopping or resting in isolated locations. Some traditions suggested that specific hours held greater danger than others, with the deepest darkness in the hours preceding dawn representing the period of maximum risk. Understanding these temporal patterns allowed travelers to time their journeys to minimize exposure to the creature's most active hunting periods. The psychological component of Phooka survival proved equally significant as physical precautions or material protections. To encounter the Phooka while maintaining mental clarity, emotional control, and focused intention increased survival likelihood substantially. Those who panicked, who abandoned reason to pure fear, or who became paralyzed by terror, often fell victim to the creature with greater ease than those who maintained mental composure. The discipline to observe the creature's behavior, to note its patterns and vulnerabilities, and to maintain rational thought despite overwhelming fear represented a form of spiritual and psychological strength that Irish culture valued and cultivated through storytelling and through ritualized preparation for potential encounter. The Phooka does not exist solely within the boundaries of Ireland, nor did its influence remain confined to the island nation that gave it birth and meaning. As Irish emigrants dispersed across the globe during the 19th and 20th centuries, fleeing famine, seeking economic opportunity, or pursuing new lives in distant lands, they carried with them the stories of the Phooka and the entire apparatus of Irish supernatural belief. These stories, transplanted to new soil and new contexts, underwent processes of transformation and adaptation, while simultaneously maintaining connections to their ancient origins. The Phooka mythology became woven into the cultural memory of Irish diaspora communities in North America, Australia, South Africa, and throughout the British Commonwealth, demonstrating the persistent power of folklore to transcend geography and to maintain cultural significance across generations and across vast distances. The mythology of Celtic shapeshifters and supernatural predators possessed resonance far beyond Irish cultural boundaries, connecting at fundamental levels with the folklore traditions of other Celtic peoples and with broader European supernatural traditions. The Phooka mythology demonstrates remarkable similarities to the Kelpie of Scottish folklore, a water-dwelling shapeshifter that manifests most frequently as a black horse and that possesses many characteristics strikingly similar to its Irish cousin. Both creatures appear at water crossings, both assume equine forms as their primary manifestation, and both demonstrate apparent intelligence and malevolent intent toward human travelers. These similarities suggest either cultural diffusion and mutual influence between Irish and Scottish traditions, or the possibility that the Phooka and Kelpie represent regional variations of a more ancient Celtic shapeshifter mythology that predated the division of Celtic peoples into distinct national groups. Welsh folklore similarly contains creatures demonstrating characteristics comparable to the Phooka, though these Welsh entities possess their own distinct cultural specificity and regional variations. The Coexisting of Scottish Highlands mythology, the Barghest of English folklore, and various other shape-shifting predators throughout Celtic and European tradition all share certain fundamental characteristics with the Phooka. Supernatural intelligence, multiple manifestations, association with liminal spaces and liminal times, and the capacity to inflict psychological trauma upon human witnesses. These cross-cultural parallels suggest that the Phooka occupies a position within a broader tradition of European shapeshifter mythology, a tradition that reflects universal human fears regarding the boundaries between civilization and wilderness, between known and unknown, between human and animal nature. The transformation that occurred when Irish emigrants carried Phooka stories to new lands reflected both cultural persistence and necessary adaptation to new contexts. In North America, where Irish immigrant communities concentrated in cities, and where rural travel patterns differed significantly from Irish conditions, the Phooka mythology underwent certain modifications. The creature remained recognizable, still a shapeshifter, still possessing the characteristic burning eyes and supernatural power. But its manifestation patterns adapted to reflect American geography and social conditions. Stories emerged of the Phooka manifesting in the wilderness beyond settled areas, of encounters along isolated American roads during seasons that American immigrants associated with Samhain and the thinning of the veil. The creature acquired new regional associations within diaspora communities, becoming connected to specific American locations where Irish communities concentrated or where Irish cultural memory remained particularly strong. The persistence of Phooka stories within diaspora communities reveals something profound about how folklore functions as a carrier of cultural identity and psychological continuity. Irish immigrants facing profound displacement, cultural alienation, and the challenge of maintaining identity in foreign lands found in Phooka, stories a connection to ancestral homelands, to cultural memory, and to collective identity that persisted despite separation from Ireland itself. Storytelling about the Phooka became a mechanism for passing cultural knowledge to younger generations born in foreign lands, a way of maintaining connection to ancestral traditions and to the spiritual worldview that had guided Irish culture for centuries. The creature became a symbol of cultural persistence, a being that could not be killed or eliminated, that maintained presence and power despite all attempts to erase or transcend it. The influence of Phooka and broader Irish supernatural mythology upon modern horror and fantasy literature demonstrates the continuing cultural significance of these traditions far beyond their Irish origins. Writers throughout the English-speaking world drew inspiration from Irish folklore, incorporating elements of the Phooka mythology into contemporary narratives designed to horrify and fascinate modern audiences. The creature's characteristics, the supernatural intelligence, the multiple manifestations, the capacity to move between worlds, the predatory intelligence combined with alien motivations, proved enormously appealing to writers seeking to create original and culturally resonant horror concepts. The Phooka, in this modern literary context, became an archetype, a pattern of supernatural danger that resonated across cultural boundaries and across time periods, suggesting something universal in human fears about the unknown and about boundaries between civilization and wilderness. The academic study of folklore and of Celtic mythology elevated the Phooka from folk superstition to subject of scholarly analysis and cultural significance. Folklorists and mythologists recognized that the Phooka mythology embodied sophisticated cultural understandings of human psychology, of seasonal cycles, of community organization, and of the mechanisms through which cultures managed fear and uncertainty. Scholars traced connections between Phooka mythology and broader patterns of Indo-European folklore, examining how similar shapeshifter myths emerged across multiple cultures, suggesting either common origins or the universal appeal of these mythological patterns to human consciousness. The Phooka became evidence of the profound sophistication of pre-industrial culture, testimony to the complex worldviews that Irish people maintained before industrialization and modernization began to reshape European consciousness. The preservation of Phooka mythology in modern Irish culture demonstrates the resilience of folklore despite profound cultural transformation. Even as Ireland underwent dramatic modernization, urbanization, and secularization, the Phooka stories persisted, maintained by storytellers and cultural enthusiasts who recognized the continued significance of these narratives to Irish identity and Irish cultural memory. The creature appears in contemporary Irish literature, in cultural festivals, and in discussions of Irish folklore, maintaining presence and relevance despite the profound changes in how modern Irish people live and work. The Phooka represents an unbroken connection between contemporary Ireland and the ancient Celtic past, a living tradition that refuses to be displaced by modernity. The global reach of Phooka mythology and Irish folklore more broadly demonstrates the power of cultural narratives to transcend geographic boundaries and to maintain significance across generations and across vast distances. The creature that emerged from ancient Irish tradition, that shaped how medieval and early modern Irish communities understood their relationship with the supernatural realm, that influenced patterns of behavior and belief across centuries, continues to exert influence upon contemporary culture across the entire English-speaking world and beyond. The Phooka represents not merely a historical curiosity or a relic of pre-modern thinking, but an ongoing cultural force, a being that carries within itself layers of meaning accumulated across centuries of human engagement with the narrative. The contemporary landscape of Ireland might appear, at first glance, fundamentally transformed from the rural world in which the Phooka mythology originally developed and flourished. Modern roads connect cities and towns with efficiency that would have seemed miraculous to 19th century travelers. Electricity illuminates the darkness that once held such terror. Communication technologies connect individuals across vast distances instantaneously. Yet despite these profound transformations in material conditions and in daily human experience, the Phooka persists within contemporary Irish consciousness, demonstrating a resilience that suggests something deeper than mere folkloric vestige. The creature continues to manifest in sightings reported by contemporary Irish people, appears in contemporary literature and artistic expressions, and occupies a significant position within modern Irish cultural identity. This persistence speaks to the enduring power of the Phooka mythology and to its capacity to maintain relevance despite the fundamental restructuring of Irish society that has occurred across the past century and a half. Modern sightings of the Phooka, while less frequently documented than historical accounts, continue to emerge from rural regions throughout Ireland, particularly during the Samhain season. Contemporary witnesses report encountering the creature in forms remarkably consistent with historical descriptions. The black horse, with burning eyes appearing at isolated crossroads. The enormous eagle, manifesting above moorland. The bull, with flaming nostrils in agricultural territories. These modern accounts possess qualities that distinguish them from nostalgic repetition of ancient folklore. Many contemporary witnesses demonstrate apparent ignorance of traditional Phooka descriptions, yet their accounts parallel historical testimonies in ways that suggest either authentic encounter or remarkable coincidence. Some modern sightings have been documented by tourism boards, local historians, and cultural investigators, creating a contemporary archive of Phooka encounters that parallels the historical record maintained by the Irish Folklore Commission. The incorporation of Phooka mythology into contemporary Irish tourism and cultural festivals represents one of the most visible manifestations of the creature's persistence in modern Irish consciousness. Samhain festivals throughout Ireland frequently feature dramatizations of Phooka encounters, theatrical presentations depicting the creature's various forms, and guided tours to historically significant Phooka encounter sites. These commercial and cultural appropriations of the mythology serve multiple functions simultaneously. They preserve knowledge of the tradition. They generate economic activity within rural communities, and they maintain the Phooka within contemporary cultural consciousness through direct engagement with the mythology. However, this incorporation into tourism also represents a kind of domestication, a transformation of the creature from active supernatural threat into cultural commodity. The question emerges of whether this transformation diminishes the Phooka's power, or whether the creature maintains its essential nature even as it becomes integrated into modern commercial culture. Contemporary Irish literature and artistic expression demonstrate continued engagement with Phooka mythology as a means of exploring deep cultural questions about identity, fear, and the relationship between civilization and wildness. Modern Irish writers incorporate the Phooka into narratives designed to examine contemporary issues through the lens of ancient mythology, using the creature's characteristics to explore themes of alienation, displacement, and the persistence of ancient forces within modern consciousness. These literary appropriations of the mythology reveal the Phooka's continued relevance as a symbol capable of carrying meaning about the human condition and about the tensions between traditional and modern worldviews. The creature becomes a vehicle through which contemporary artists can explore the persistence of pre-modern consciousness within modern minds, examining the ways that ancient fears and ancient wisdom continue to shape contemporary experience despite profound material and social transformation. The Phooka's persistence within contemporary Irish consciousness also reflects deeper truths about the relationship between modernization and cultural memory. The creature represents connection to ancestral lands, to ancient traditions, and to a worldview that predates industrial capitalism and consumer culture. In a culture experiencing rapid modernization and globalization, the Phooka mythology provides anchor points to historical continuity and to cultural specificity that resists homogenization. Communities maintaining awareness of and engagement with Phooka mythology are simultaneously maintaining connection to their own particular history, to the specific geography of their regions, and to cultural frameworks that emphasize respect for land and for forces beyond human control. In this sense, the Phooka represents not mere cultural relic, but active resistance to complete cultural erasure through modernization. The evolution of Phooka mythology in contemporary contexts reveals how folklore adapts to accommodate new circumstances while maintaining essential characteristics. Modern retellings sometimes position the Phooka as guardian of environmental integrity, a supernatural force protecting the natural world against human exploitation and environmental degradation. Other contemporary interpretations view the creature as metaphor for the return of repressed historical trauma, as embodiment of the violence and suffering embedded within Irish history that refuses to remain buried despite modern attempts to transcend the past. These reinterpretations transform the Phooka from simple predator into complex symbol capable of carrying layers of contemporary meaning, while maintaining connection to historical sources and traditional understandings. The accessibility of Phooka mythology through modern media, internet resources, published collections of folklore, documentary films, has democratized knowledge of the creature in ways that contrast sharply with historical periods, when access to such knowledge was limited to communities maintaining direct oral transmission. Young Irish people separated from rural contexts and from direct connection to traditional storytelling communities can access Phooka mythology through various media formats, creating new forms of engagement with ancient traditions. This democratization potentially weakens some aspects of the traditional mythology, the lived connection to specific places, the embodied knowledge transmitted through personal encounter, while simultaneously expanding awareness of the traditions and creating new forms of engagement and interpretation. The phenomenon of modern Phooka sightings might be interpreted through various frameworks: as genuine supernatural manifestations, as psychological phenomena rooted in cultural expectation and folklore knowledge, as misidentifications of natural phenomena through folklore-filtered perception, or as some combination of these possibilities. The question of what contemporary Phooka sightings represent remains genuinely open, resisting definitive explanation. Yet, the consistency with which such sightings occur, the apparent sincerity of contemporary witnesses, and the phenomenological reality that these experiences possess for those reporting them suggest that the Phooka maintains some form of presence and power within contemporary Irish consciousness, whether that presence is supernatural, psychological, or cultural in nature. The Phooka's refusal to disappear despite profound cultural transformation speaks to something fundamental about the relationship between human consciousness and ancient mythology. The creature represents forces that modernization cannot eliminate, the wilderness that persists beyond the edges of human civilization, the power of nature that remains fundamentally resistant to human control, the presence of the past that refuses to be entirely transcended by contemporary conditions. As long as these realities persist, and they necessarily persist, being fundamental to the structure of existence itself, the Phooka mythology will continue to possess resonance and relevance. The creature becomes almost a necessary mythology, a cultural framework essential for comprehending aspects of human experience that rationalism and modernization cannot fully explain or control. The modern Phooka thus represents not the dying remnant of pre-modern consciousness, but rather a living tradition actively maintained and adapted by contemporary Irish culture to address ongoing concerns about place, history, identity, and the relationship between human civilization and forces beyond human control. The creature persists, not because Irish culture refuses to modernize, but because the Phooka carries within itself truths that transcend specific historical periods or technological conditions. In this sense, the modern Phooka remains as active and as relevant as it has ever been, continuing to embody the ancient wisdom that respect for forces beyond human comprehension, maintenance of proper protocols regarding encounters with the unknown, and acknowledgement of the limits of human power represent essential components of surviving and thriving within a universe far larger and far more complex than human understanding can fully encompass. As we approach the conclusion of our journey through the darkness of Irish mythology and into the depths of the Phooka's ancient terror, we find ourselves positioned at a threshold not unlike the one that defines Samhain itself. The exploration we have undertaken across these chapters has traced the creature from its most magnificent manifestations through the complexity of its nature, from the sacred geography it haunts to the modern contexts in which it continues to exert influence. Yet, none of this knowledge brings us closer to a place of comfort or complete understanding. Rather, we arrive at the final threshold possessing greater awareness of mystery itself, deeper recognition of forces that defy human comprehension, and profound respect for the wisdom that Irish culture developed across centuries in negotiating coexistence with something fundamentally alien to human nature. The Phooka awaits. Even now, in this moment as you listen to these words, the creature exists in the liminal spaces that persist between civilization and wilderness, between the ordered world of human construction and the wild territories where human authority holds no sway. The creature does not age or diminish. It does not become less powerful or less dangerous as centuries accumulate. Instead, the Phooka persists in its eternal vigilance, maintaining presence at crossroads and bridges, on moorlands and mountaintops, in those zones where the boundary between worlds remains perpetually negotiable. With each cycle of seasons, as autumn approaches and the days shorten toward winter, the Phooka's stirring begins again, a renewal of the ancient cycle that has continued without interruption since before recorded history began. The approach of another Samhain brings with it the certainty of the Phooka's renewed manifestation. The creature does not require ritual summoning or human belief to activate. Rather, Samhain itself generates the conditions that allow the shapeshifter's power to expand and intensify, creating the liminal space in which the Phooka can operate with minimal constraint. The burning of fires, the leaving of offerings, the maintenance of ancient traditions. These practices persist not because they create the Phooka, but because they acknowledge the creature's inevitable return and prepare human consciousness for that return. To maintain these traditions is to accept that some cycles persist regardless of human preference or belief, that the turning of seasons brings with it supernatural consequences that must be managed rather than eliminated. What has our exploration of the Phooka mythology revealed about the nature of ancient wisdom and about the relationship between human consciousness and forces beyond human control? The creatures that Irish culture encoded within its mythology were not merely inventions of fertile imagination or primitive attempts to explain natural phenomena. Instead, these beings represented sophisticated understandings of psychological, spiritual, and physical dangers that required human attention and respect. The Phooka specifically embodied recognition that forces of tremendous power exist beyond human authority, that these forces possess intelligence and motivations that remain fundamentally alien to human understanding, and that coexistence with such forces requires not conquest, but rather negotiation, respect, and maintenance of proper protocols. The wisdom embedded within Phooka mythology teaches that certain boundaries should not be crossed, that certain territories belong to powers other than human, and that human survival depends upon recognizing limits to human authority and wisdom. In a contemporary world that has increasingly emphasized human dominion over nature, technological mastery of previously uncontrollable phenomena, and rational explanation of all experiences, the Phooka mythology offers counterbalance. A reminder that mystery persists, that power exists beyond human comprehension, and that respect for the unknown represents not primitive superstition, but rather mature recognition of reality's true complexity. The creature's resistance to being understood, its refusal to be categorized or explained through rational frameworks, constitutes a kind of wisdom itself, teaching through its very inscrutability. The ancient compact between humans and the Phooka, encoded within the tradition of the final sheaf and maintained through countless generations of cautious coexistence, represents a model for sustainable relationship with forces that cannot be conquered. This is not relationship built upon complete safety or upon elimination of danger, but rather upon negotiated balance, upon mutual acknowledgement, and upon acceptance that coexistence involves managed risk rather than perfect security. The Phooka remains dangerous, the tradition does not claim otherwise. Yet through proper respect, appropriate offerings, and adherence to ancient protocols, communities learned not to eliminate the danger, but to maintain workable relationship with it. This principle extends far beyond the specific context of Irish folklore into fundamental questions about how humans should relate to natural forces, to other species, and to the untamed territories that persist within and beyond human civilization. The persistence of the Phooka mythology across centuries and across vast geographic distances suggests something profound about human nature and about universal patterns embedded within human consciousness. The shapeshifter mythology resonates not merely within Irish culture, but within Celtic traditions broadly, and within European folklore more comprehensively. Stories of creatures that transform, that hunt human prey, that embody forces beyond human control appear across cultures with remarkable consistency, suggesting either patterns of cultural transmission or the possibility that such mythology reflects genuine human encounter with phenomena that produces similar effects across multiple societies. Whether the Phooka represents literal supernatural entity, archetypal psychological force, or something else entirely, its power to shape consciousness and to influence human behavior across centuries testifies to its psychological and cultural reality. The darkness that falls again each Samhain season carries with it both danger and potential for profound insight. Those who approach this darkness with proper respect and appropriate awareness discover that it is not mere void, but rather a space rich with possibility, with access to knowledge and understanding that daylight consciousness cannot achieve. The Phooka, terrible as it is, represents access to truths about existence that conventional reality obscures. To encounter the creature and survive is to undergo transformation, to gain knowledge of reality's deeper structures, and to recognize one's own position within a universe far more complex and far more populated than ordinary perception suggests. Fear remains real. Danger persists. Yet alongside these experiences emerges strange beauty and profound recognition of something vast and powerful that deserves respect and wonder. As another Samhain approaches, as the veil grows thin, and as the boundaries between worlds become negotiable, the Phooka waits with the patience of something that has existed for millennia and will exist for millennia more. The creature does not threaten, it simply is, maintaining presence in the liminal spaces, continuing to enforce the ancient laws, remaining eternally vigilant at the boundaries of civilization. Those who travel the Irish roads as darkness falls during this dangerous season would be wise to remember the wisdom encoded within folklore, to carry with them appropriate respect and awareness, to leave their offerings in the proper places, and to acknowledge that they move through territory that belongs to powers far older and far more powerful than themselves. This has been our journey through the terror and the complexity of the Phooka mythology. From the magnificent black horse that appears at crossroads to the hairy shadow that emerges as judgment for transgression, from the regional variations encoded within Irish tradition to the creature's persistence in contemporary consciousness, we have traced the contours of a mythology that continues to shape how Irish people understand their relationship with land, with history, and with forces beyond human control. If these chapters have resonated with you, if you have felt the power of these ancient stories and recognized their relevance to contemporary existence, I encourage you to subscribe to Echoes of the Old World. Our channel remains dedicated to exploring the depths of historical cultures, to uncovering the wisdom embedded within ancient mythologies, and to understanding how the stories our ancestors maintained continue to speak to fundamental truths about human existence. Thank you for joining us through this exploration of darkness and wisdom, of terror and respect, of the eternal return of forces that refuse to be forgotten or transcended.